The next speaker is Evelien Scheltinga, and she uses the pronoun she. Yes. And she's a curator and researcher. She took part in the research for the exhibition The Stedelijk in Wartime at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam in 2015. And she had a curatorial traineeship at the vanabbemuseum in Eindhoven in 2015 as well. She's part of a research group based in Morocco, focusing on different museum models, and she worked with Jonas Staal on several projects and exhibitions, amongst others the one we have now downstairs in the basement. Currently she is assistant curator at the vanabbemuseum, working with Nick, and her research for the Deviant Research Program focuses on the position of the vanabbemuseum during the Second World War. Evelien, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, and thank you Christiane for the kind introduction. This is a bit of a difficult moment for me because for the past year I've been researching, spent my time in Dutch archives collecting bits and pieces of information about what happened in the vanabbemuseum during the occupation. And this means that today it's the end of the research, and I think there's still much more that I could have found or that should have been told, but so I think this will be a longer project that I will continue after today. I specifically focused on the exhibitions and the changes of directorship. The vanabbemuseum knew little about its own history during the occupation due to the lack of archive, which is why I searched through all possible archives I could find in the Netherlands to recollect this forgotten memory of the museum. I have found so much information that I cannot put this all in the 20 minutes I have today. So in this presentation I will focus on 3 exhibitions and the 3 directors, and a bit of how the positions of these directors changed the narrative of the museum. From the occupation of the Netherlands in May 1940 until the liberation, September 1944, there were 32 exhibitions in the museum. I made a timeline and chart which will pop up every now and then just to get a feel of what happened and where everything is positioned. Since the foundation of the museum in 1936, the Van Abbe organized a wide variety of exhibitions from 16th century art to contemporary artists. The municipality decided on the yearly budget and appointed the director Visser for 2 days a week. A concierge was responsible for small maintenance and guarding the artworks. That was all the staff the museum had. The Van Abbe, at the time of the occupation, the Van Abbe was known as a local museum with a modern art collection donated by Henri van Abbe, and it was still looking for its curatorial identity. As a consequence of the outbreak of the Second World War, 3 September 1939, a part of the collection and loans, around 60 artworks, were moved to the basement of the museum. The museum did not organize exhibitions between September and December 1939. The collection of Museum Kempenland, a museum with local archaeological finds, guilds and farmer clothing, moved to the Van Abbe Museum because their building was used for distribution purposes. Their collection was on show in one of the galleries of the museum. Also in 1939, Visser received a letter that the basement of the museum was to be used for the Air Protection Service. Visser was asked to install a double wooden door to access the basement, to protect all the basement windows with sandbags, and the glass roof of the museum was to be painted with a matte dark paint to make the museum less visible as a target. This of course had its influence on the light in the galleries. After the Rotterdam Blitz, the aerial bombardment of Rotterdam by the Luftwaffe, 14 May 1940, the Dutch government surrendered and was occupied by Nazi Germany. Although expecting the worst, daily life wasn't affected immediately by the occupation. The German regime directly outlawed all socialist and communist parties, and in 1941 it forbade all parties except for the Dutch National Socialist Party, NSB, led by Anton Mussert. Measures against Jews and deportations started in February 1941. The Dutch Cultuurkamer was founded in 1942, based on the principles and ideas of the Rijkskulturkamer in Germany. The Cultuurkamer had an influence on the exhibition program in museums. Artists who were not registered at the Cultuurkamer were not allowed to practice their profession, to show nor to sell artworks. Most Dutch artists were registered at the Cultuurkamer through their artist society. Due to the occupation, the museum closed from 10 May until 1st of June 1940. The first exhibition, however, organized by the Artist Society Breda's Kunstkring, opened 20 July. 1940 had a total of 6 exhibitions, 4 of which were of artist societies. One commemorated Henry van Abbe, who passed away 18 November 1940. And the other exhibition was about landscape architecture. The museum had a total of 3,721 visitors, the lowest visiting number in the museum's history. In 1941, Visser was able to organize 8 exhibitions, 5 from artist societies and 2 solo exhibitions, one of J.H. Jurres and one of Betsy Westendorp-Ossiek. The other 2 exhibitions were dedicated to drawing education. A total of 12,630 people visited the museum. Most of the visitors came to the exhibition Young Eindhoven Draws, Young Eindhoven Tekent, a drawing competition for primary school children in which a selection of 500 drawings were shown in the galleries of the museum. I show these images because these are one of the only images of exhibitions in the museum during the occupation. After 1941, things changed. Mayor Verdijk was arrested 15 October 1941 because he was too supportive of Jews. Active NSB member Huub Pulles was installed as mayor 21 February 1942. The ceremony took place at the vanabbemuseum that, as you see in the photograph, was decorated with flowers and flags. There is the portrait of Adolf Hitler, the swastika flag, the NSB emblem, the Dutch National Socialist Party, their flag, and the portrait of Anton Mussert, the leader of the party. Thanks to speakers, the speech could be heard outside, where the VA, the paramilitary arm of the NSB, awaited Pulles. Here also the swastika flag and the NSB flag were raised. In his speech, Pulles made clear that from this moment on, Eindhoven would be under National Socialist governance. Here you can see them leaving the museum. Pulles received a position in the advisory board of the museum. Visser decided to quit. The day before the installation of Pulles, he sent his resignation letter, mainly because he did not want to organize any propaganda exhibitions. Piet Peeters was installed as director at 1st of April 1942. Peeters was a drawing teacher, and there's not much known about him. Unfortunately, I could not find too much information. I don't know if he was a member of the National Socialist Movement in the Netherlands and what the motivation was to appoint him as director. There is no archival information available. We do know that from this moment on, more National Socialist narratives entered the museum. The first exhibition under his directorship was by the Artist Society Nederlandse Kunstkring, founded in 1940 to serve the community with art. They were all registered at the Cultuurkamer. Peeters acquired Stil Leven met Citroen for the museum collection from this exhibition. 20 May was the opening of Huisvlei-tentoonstelling, organized by the society Vreugde en Arbeid, Joy and Labor, part of the National Socialist Trade Union. The exhibition promotes DIY culture and national self-sufficiency, which fits perfectly within the idea of the Bloed en Bodem theory. The Huisvlei-tentoonstelling was the result of a longer-term huisvlijtactie called Nederlands Jeugd aan het werk, Dutch Youth Working. Huisvleit should give children a positive activity and distract them from criminality. It also helps to develop good taste, as they called it. This national call had a big attention in the media in Eindhoven. There were many newspaper advertisements that I found, and I just put 2 here, to ask children and housewives to send in their huisvleit, their handicrafts, to be shown in the exhibition. Polygoon Journaal is a cinema newsreel, made a report of the exhibition. Just quickly want to show.
Het resultaat van een huisvlijtactie te Eindhoven was te zien op een tentoonstelling in het vanabbemuseum. De opening had plaats in tegenwoordigheid van professor Goedewagen, secretaris-generaal van het departement van Volksvoorlichting, en van de heer Woudenberg.
The man with the glasses is the leader of the Cultuurkamer, and next to him the leader of the National Socialist Trade Union.
resultaat.
Once is more than enough. Yes. This report was shown in cinemas around the country. And as you could see, the variety of work shown in the exhibition is very wide. They were not just quickly made handicrafts, but also like the ship and the train models must have been years of work besides people's daytime jobs. 29 May, the museum was closed to the public due to the visit of the NSB leader Anton Mussert in his day trip to Eindhoven. He had a tour through the exhibition, led by Peeters on the photo in the top left, which was reported in several newspapers. Although these images were not in newspapers, I found them in the National War Archives, and it is also not known what Mussert thought of the exhibition. 1942, the museum had a total of 10,059 visitors in 8 exhibitions. 3 by artist societies, 1 organized by the museum with the collection of Albert Neuhuis, and 3 by external National Socialist societies, one of which was Huisblad-tentoonstelling, the other Volkstentoonstelling Nederlandse Kunst van de provincies Brabant en Zeeland, an exhibition with local art organized by the Cultuurkamer, and Hulpwerk Beeldende Kunst. On 6 December 1942, the RAF bombed the Philips factories, where radios for the German occupier were produced. The bombs also hit houses, churches, shops, and a hospital, and 130 people died. In the year report, Peeters reported that 80 artworks that were lent to the museum were sent back to their lenders, possibly also due to this bombing. How to use old to make something new. This was the central theme in Huisvrouwen worden vindingrijk, Housewives Become Resourceful. This traveling exhibition was first shown in a Christian clubhouse in Groningen. Women of the Nationaal Socialistische Vrouwenschaft, the women's wing of the NSDAP, organized the exhibition and were present to provide visiting women information. Unfortunately, we do not have pictures of this exhibition at the Vanabbe. These were taken in Groningen. The vanabbemuseum is the first and only museum to host this exhibition. During the opening, 3 March 1943, Reisleiterin Frau Herzog pointed to the fact that for the exhibition, no objects were bought. Everything was made by women and nothing was for sale. They were their private household projects. The exhibition is described as a revelation of the secrets of women and their housekeeping, so that others could learn. In Eindhoven, it was very practically organized. Women could bring old clothes and scrap fabrics, and the Nationaal Socialistische Vrouwenschaft gave advice about how to reuse them. They would even cut them in pieces so that they could resew them at home. Demonstrations about food, natural products, and how to use threads from old stockings to knit new garments were part of the exhibition. This is a different setup than the Huisvrouwen-tentoonstelling. Huisvrouwen worden vindingrijk was very hands-on and had active and practical propaganda. Women of the Vrouwenschaft were present at all times. Slogans such as, "Dear housewife, do your best and make something new out of what you have left," and "The toys you make yourself bring joy and satisfaction" were printed on the wall. 4,600 people visited the exhibition, and numerous women registered for the course to make house slippers. Due to the success, the exhibition was extended with 4 days. This is interesting since no newspapers have advertisement about this exhibition. The Vrouwenschaft must have organized a campaign in the city or collaborated with local women's societies. 1943 had a total of 10 scheduled exhibitions. 4 were cancelled. People were resistant to transport artworks after the RAF bombings. During Huisvrouwen worden vindingrijk, Peeters had to step down as director due to health reasons. The fascist and NSB member Louis Vrijdag was installed as director 15 March 1943. Vrijdag was an active member of the youth fascist movement in the 1930s. He was one of the first 1,000 members of the NSB. Also, Vrijdag hosted and organized exhibitions with a National Socialist narrative. Herlevend Nederland, a traveling NSB exhibition, a solo show of Otto Hanrat, an exhibition of the Kunstkring Nederland, the artist society I mentioned earlier, in which works for the collection were acquired by Wim Baas and P. Schmitz, followed by a graduation exhibition and a Christmas exhibition. Although Vrijdag did his best in organizing exhibitions, the war conditions made this complicated. Lenders cancelled their loans and it was difficult to transport artworks. Since Vrijdag entered the museum, there was a new visiting committee. Members were NSB-mayor Peeters, the Alderman for Education Hermans, and Vrijdag himself. With Vrijdag, fascist narratives entered the museum and art is barely shown. The last exhibition I want to discuss is Zo leeft Eindhoven, How Eindhoven Lives. This was an exhibition about the growth and development of Eindhoven since the annexation of the surrounding villages in 1920. Local newspapers were very enthusiastic about the exhibition. Finally, the museum focused on important local issues. Brabant has a history of strong nationalistic feelings, Brabant feelings, called there was a society called Brabantia Nostra that worked with this. Especially in the 1940s, this was part of people's minds. For the exhibition, a selection was made of 2,500 photographs of Eindhoven from the collection of the Philips family. Furthermore, a great selection of maps was presented. The exhibition showed a drawn reconstruction of the Demer, Eindhoven's main shopping street, that was severely bombed 6 December 1942. Copies for the drawing were for sale at the connoisseurs and very popular. Paintings and drawings depicting historical Eindhoven were presented. Some were from the 19th century, most were contemporary as newspapers report, such as this drawing, Het Pannenhuis, by former director Peeters. It is likely that the objects from Museum Kempenland were also on display. Zo leeft Eindhoven was also open in the evenings, from 7 to 9. This is interesting because the glass roof of the museum was painted with the matte dark paint, and electricity was scarce in this time, and I could not find any permission for extra electricity, so I don't know if they had extra light in the rooms, or it was just very dark. At 5 August, Dagblad van het Zuiden reports that the exhibition had its 25,000th paying visitor, just after 28 days. Due to this success, the exhibition was extended to 15 August 1944. This also underlines how important people in Eindhoven found the exhibition and the history of Eindhoven. The last 2 exhibitions in the museum opened 2 September 1944. A solo exhibition bij Jan Wingen, which I will get back to later, and Wansmaak en gezonde kunst, bad taste and healthy art. There are no real reports about these exhibitions, and probably not a lot of people even visited them. The Allied were getting stronger and closer, and from 2 September on, Germans started to flee from Eindhoven. 3 September, the airport, used by the German army, was severely bombed. The days before the liberation of Eindhoven, that was at 18 September 1944, are marked by unrest. People were waiting in their house until the liberation came. Wansmaak en gezonde kunst was a traveling exhibition and showed several examples of what was bad and what was good art. The only newspaper who dared to make a comparison to degenerate art when the exhibition was shown in Maastricht rectified the day after because this subject was too sensitive. 1944 is marked with more obscure exhibitions. In total, the museum showed 6 exhibitions. 3 of them had a very strong National Socialist narrative. Besides Wansmaak en gezonde kunst, Vrijdag allowed the traveling exhibition Wat aarde bewaarde, What the Earth Preserved, in which archaeological finds are connected to the Germanic history of the Netherlands. The other exhibition is Wie en wat waren onze voorouders, How and what were our ancestors, organized by the Dutch Society of Genealogy, in that time an organization with strong National Socialist focus. There was also the solo exhibition by Jan Wingen I mentioned earlier. This is an older artist who only actively started to show his work in 1943, both in the Netherlands and in Germany, and they're mainly landscapes. There were also 2 group exhibitions of local artists for which Vrijdag collaborated with the Cultuurkamer. In conclusion, a lot has happened in the museum during the occupation. Not only did the museum switch directors often, there was also a varying exhibition program. I discussed 3 exhibitions, giving a small example of what has happened, but this doesn't capture the whole story. It is, however, clear that every director had their own ideas about art. In the beginning of the occupation, there is no National Socialism present in the museum. This only starts when Visser resigns. Peeters is installed as mayor, and Peeters as director in 1942. The exhibitions that have a more National Socialist narrative are in purple, so you can see that they really are starting when Peeters is installed as director. From Peeters on, the exhibition program follows the ideas of the new government regarding art, and they collaborate a lot with the Cultuurkamer and the Nederlandse Volksdienst. National Socialists have a physical presence in the museum, and 2 exhibitions were organized focusing on the women's function in the house. Since the installation of the Cultuurkamer, the only artist organization who exhibited in the vanabbemuseum was the Nederlandse Kunstkring, founded in 1940 to serve the community with art. When Peeters had to step down, Vrijdag was installed. This active fascist brought a stronger National Socialist propaganda to the museum. Unfortunately, I could not find if he actively brought the exhibitions to the museum or they were offered, but everything that was offered was allowed. He had the NSB propaganda exhibition Herlevend Nederland and the genealogical exhibitions I just mentioned. Zo Leeft Eindhoven was organized by Visser, as well as 2 group exhibitions. The last 2 exhibitions at the museum, Jan Binge and Wansmaak en Gezonde Kunst, showed only art approved by the Cultuurkamer. These exhibitions quit due to the liberation of Eindhoven. In the end, despite all the National Socialist narratives and propaganda in the exhibitions, it is important to know that most of these exhibitions had a very short running time in comparison to other exhibitions. Huisvlei-tentoonstelling, which is the first small purple block, was on for 9 days. Huisvrouwen worden vindingrijk for 13 days, whereas artist societies and solo shows usually had 22 to 24 days. They're the bigger blocks. The only exception is Zo Leeft Eindhoven, which ran for 38 days. This could also be due to the fact that the Allied were getting stronger and they didn't know if they wanted to change the exhibition, or just because it was very popular. But despite the fact that National Socialist narratives were presented in the museum, they were not permanently visible. I hope that I give you some idea about what was going on in the museum between 1940 and 1944. I thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, feel free.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Evelien. Yes, thank you for shedding light on this hidden part of the history of this institution. Are there any questions from the floor? I have a question. Nick has a question.
Thanks so much, Evelien. Just quite a practical thing. Where were you finding everything? Because I know here within the city and the institution, the line I always heard was that there was very little information. So I just wondered where you found everything.
We have a National Archive of War History that has the whole archive of the Cultuurkamer and the government. And there was some communication with the museum in that archive. I went to the National Archive. There is, the videos are from the archive. It's the institution that holds the video archive of the Netherlands, the TV and radio archive. From the Second World War, there's lots of images online. And we have a local archive here with the history of Eindhoven and the municipality archive that's not connected to the museum archive somehow. So I went everywhere, basically, where I thought they might have information. Yeah.
Could you clarify or get an answer on the question, what happened to the archive in the vanabbemuseum?
No, and I'm also not too sure if it really existed. Because usually when there is an archive, the museum sends letters and people receive them. But in the archive of both the Cultuurkamer and the Department for Culture and Propaganda, there are 2 or 3 letters from the vanabbemuseum sent to them. So I'm not too sure if the museum was actually active in sending letters and collecting material. So I don't know if it is destroyed or not.
I have another question, and that's related to your research for the Stedelijk Museum.
Mm-hmm.
Can you draw parallels, or are there difference between the program that was developed in Amsterdam and the program here in Eindhoven?
It's a bit different because the Stedelijk Museum Amsterdam had David Ruel as director and Willem Sandberg as curator. And Sandberg was a communist and was very modernist in his exhibitions, and they had to change their exhibition program to be able to keep the museum open. Whereas here, Visser chose to resign to protect himself. And the Stedelijk actively organized exhibitions themselves, whereas here there are so many exhibitions by external organizations. There are 2 exhibitions, the solo show of Betsy Westendorp Ossiek that was shown at the Stedelijk before it came here, and Wat Aarde Bewaarde was also at Stedelijk before it came here. But the Stedelijk was more active in protecting their own identity. But I think the difference in that is the vanabbemuseum was so young and didn't have a strong identity or narrative yet. They didn't know what the museum, they weren't a museum of modern art yet. So they didn't have something to protect. Also, they didn't have a big following in Eindhoven. Not many people would visit the museum regularly, whereas the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam had this already.
Other questions?
Thank you. That was really fascinating to hear about that, especially being here and seeing those images of the Nazi flag inside of the building. I was also wondering a bit more about this archival work where you don't have more documents. If you could speak a bit more about how did you feel while we were there and you can't find this history and this curiosity. And I also had my own curiosity was what happened immediately after. I know that it's outside of the scope of your presentation, but I was wondering if this history of the Nazi occupation was ever analyzed by the museum right after the occupation, or if it was completely left to be forgotten.
I'll get to your second question first and then get back to your first. So there was never really an analysis about what happened in the museum because Visser left and Visser was the director. The NSB mayor came and appointed 2 different directors, so this was out of what the museum organized itself. Visser did come back in 1945, but resigned soon after, and the new director, Eddie de Wilde, I think, kind of kept what happened during the war as the history of the museum, but he was developing a new museum, and he was the one who focused more on becoming a modern art museum. Louis Vrijdag, however, was judged by his work, and I think he got some prison time, like most people who were collaborating in this period. And your question the question was, where or how do I find the archive?
How did you feel working with this archive that you can't find the things that you're looking for?
Well, I see that as an adventure. So I wouldn't call it, it's a hunt. It's a hunt to find more material, and that's why I also said I don't have the feeling that this is finished, because I'm pretty sure that there is material hidden somewhere that I cannot find yet, but I enjoyed that. For my master thesis, I researched what happened in the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, and there was a very big archive, but I also found other material in other archives, because an archive is also what is kept and what is collected, and in the other archives I found different perspectives and narratives, and that's what I will try to do here as well, to just see what there is and what it tells about what happened. But mainly I based the whole research on the newspaper archive. In the Netherlands we have, the National Archive has digitized all the newspapers published between 1940 and 1945. So that's a great source.
I saw a hand. One more question.
Thank you. This is incredibly insightful and something that I had absolutely no awareness of, and I'm sure a lot of people. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Kulturkamer more, a little bit to do with, because it controlled how resources were made available to artists as well, right?
Yes.
Okay, if you could, talk about that, that would be interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. So the Kulturkamer was founded in February 1942 as part of the new Department of Culture and Arts of the new National Socialist government. And every artist had to register at the Kulturkamer, and if you didn't, you weren't allowed to practice your profession anymore. And they were actively also giving funds and subsidies to artists allowing them to work. And they actively organized exhibitions. I didn't discuss this, but the Volkstentoonstelling Beeldende Kunst Brabant en Zeeland was an exhibition where every artist registered at the Cultuurkamer in the provinces Brabant and Zeeland could send in their artworks. I think the museum received over 500 artworks that were all shown in the museum, and the purpose of these exhibitions was to sell artworks, to represent the artists and to give them an opportunity to exhibit. There was no selection made, only a limit of 2 artworks per artist. And this happened in almost all of the provinces of the Netherlands, and the remains of the exhibition, so everything that was not sold, was sent to the Rijksmuseum, the National Museum in Amsterdam, where all the rest was shown to be sold. So they were really active in promoting artists and giving them a platform to exhibit, which was not present in the Netherlands before the occupation. There were no big art funds or subsidies for artists. And if you didn't have any material, you could ask them to supply you. They would give it.
One last question.
Yeah, just, this is a sort of a follow-up question as what you were just saying. That sort of sounds like, I mean, it sounds like the subsidy systems that we now know and that are now the structure of
Yes.
most of our cultural
It is, yeah.
practice are then
Yeah.
based on this,
Yes.
this history.
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah. So there is an interesting research about how this came into being, but the Netherlands didn't have any art subsidies before the occupation. The governments thought that art was something that artists should work on, and if they were good enough, they would get money through selling. And from the Cultuurkamer on, the government started to give out subsidies, and it's mainly based on how the Cultuurkamer worked, although after the Second World War you didn't have to register as an artist anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evelien, for your talk.